Welcome to Adjunctitis, from surviving to thriving, teaching hacks to reduce stress, save time, and avoid common pitfalls. I'm April Brown, an associate professor of journalism at Cal State LA. Welcome to Season 2. I'm proud to announce that Adjunctitis is a 2024 Webby honoree in the Advice and How-To category. Now, on to the content. If you listened to episode 19, we had a discussion about teaching diverse learners, and we're going to get a bit more specific now and talk about how to help students with disabilities. And because there are laws that protect those students and what are called accommodations to support them, this is just part 1 of 3. So welcome to episode 20. Think equity, not equality. First, a story. One of the classes I teach is a TV news studio production course, basically how to put together a news show, the kind that you may or may not watch. It's a required course for our journalism majors, and there's a lot of equipment, some of it in small spaces, in places that were designed and built well before the Americans with Disabilities Act became law in 1990. One semester, I had a student in a wheelchair enroll in the class, and while they could access the rooms, using some of the equipment that was integral to the course was more than they could physically manage. So an accommodation was made for a course substitution because we couldn't fundamentally alter the class for that one student and still teach all of the learning objectives by the end of the semester. And if it sounds complicated, it is, which is why I've invited the director of Cal State LA's Office for Students with Disabilities to help us understand it. Gonzalo Centeno, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
I would like to start with, what do offices like yours, and at Cal State LA, it's called the Office for Students with Disabilities. What do you generally do? People may not understand or may not even know that you're on campus, but what's your job on a day-to-day basis?
Well, we are mandated by the university and by the Americans with Disabilities Act to provide support services to students with diverse disabilities. Some of the students that we work with have various types of challenges. Common diagnoses that we work with significantly are students with mobility impairments, students who have visual disabilities, students who have psychiatric disabilities, and we've had quite an increase in that population post-COVID. So it's definitely growing situation. We also provide services to students with learning disabilities. So I can fairly say that students with learning disabilities and students with psychiatric disabilities are kind of neck and neck in the number of students. One of the populations that is growing the fastest, though, are students on the autism spectrum. So we're getting a lot more students, and from what I can see with the enrollment this coming year, it's increasing as well. So there's various types of challenges and disabilities. Every diagnosis has a different challenge because we focus on the functional limitations of the student, not so much the diagnosis, when we determine the appropriate support services for them.
So when you send out a notice, and your office ironically did send out one just this morning that I've been reading, just like these emails are coming, what do you want faculty members to know right off? Because this is something that happens in every university.
Yes. So every semester, our students will initiate what's called a notification for academic support services. The notification for academic support services derives the information from the student's profile, which has been both approved by the counselor of record and the student. So in the notification is where we detail and delineate the support services the student is eligible to receive. One thing for faculty to make note is that when you receive the notification, definitely go through it to see what that particular student needs, because for the most part, every student will have an individual notification. Some common features, though, in those notifications could be the alternative testing agreement. The alternative testing agreement is the testing accommodation that student receives. So for the faculty, the important thing is to open up the agreement and complete the information that is required of them. Some of the information that's required is whether or not the exam is going to be in person or online. And if it is going to be in person, how much time is the class getting? And are there any materials that are allowed during the exam? Those are three important components of the alternative testing agreement. Based on that information, whenever the student schedules an exam, it's scheduled with the appropriate extended time. So the system will automatically extend the time. It'll give a specific block where the student can take the exam, and then it'll also give the location that we just determined where the student will be administered the exam. For online exams, it's a little bit easier, I would say, only because you are creating the extended time on the platform that you're using to provide the exam, whether it be Canvas or something else. Just extend the time for the one student. You can give the one student a password to get into it. I'm not sure exactly how that works. That's more of a CETL question at that point.
That would be our Center for Teaching and Learning for those of you who don't have that particular thing at your school. Yeah, in Canvas, at least I can say that you just go into the student's profile when you're managing the quiz and you add extra time or extra attempts very easily.
Yes.
That's actually one of the easier things that the learning management systems seem to
Yes,
do.
absolutely.
I want to go back to the in-person testing though, because, and we haven't discussed this yet, confidentiality is required. If a student needs more time, and if these are in person tests, if they get extra time in a classroom, that might just let people know that they have some kind of disability. So, do they always then take it in a separate space, or would it be okay to have them take it in the classroom space and give them extra time?
So typically they will take it in one of our testing centers, and then we'll schedule the particular space in our area. We've been very fortunate in the new building that we have a large testing center where we have students come in and test. That center also has some individual testing rooms for those students who have more of a distractibility challenge. And so we do provide individual separate rooms within that same area that are supervised by an OSD test proctor. Now, we do recommend that students take it in the facility only because we want to maintain the aspect of the accommodation whole. Sometimes we've had faculty that offer their office where the student can take the exam with the extended time, which is fine, but um, it doesn't always offer the least distractible environment. Sometimes people are coming in and out, or the phone is ringing, and so we always want to let the student take it with our center. I think that's important, at least where it's feasible. But we will provide a link where the instructor can upload the exam. Once we have it, we administer it to the student, collect it, and then send it back to the instructor. And we have delivery dates specifically scheduled to bring exams back to the instructor.
I would imagine you have this process pretty much down to a science.
The team is really good. They're great to work with, and they handle all the details and all the nuances of the alternative testing process, and they do a really good job.
For people who are just coming into the classroom, often from industry like I did, or even faculty members who did some maybe student teaching, what are some common misconceptions that you've been finding? You and I had a conversation about a student once, and I think my misconception was that everything had to be equal. And you described it a little bit differently, and that really changed my frame of mind to approaching students with disabilities. Can you describe that misconception that I had?
Oftentimes, I think the idea is that OSD is looking to provide an equal opportunity to students in the classroom or in exams or whatever the situation may be. But we're looking to provide a more equitable environment or more equitable opportunity for students to participate, whether it be in the class or whether it be in other activities or other programs. I think really focusing on the equitable part of it provides a better understanding of what the challenges are that the student is facing and how we can best accommodate.
Can you give me an example of what someone might consider an equal accommodation, which wouldn't be best, and what an equitable accommodation might be? Is there a way to kind of compare and contrast those?
But let's say, for example, like in your studio, for example, I know that oftentimes there are requirements um, within studio to do certain physical activities. And I've been there. I'm a wheelchair user myself, and I've been there and I checked it out. While you have equal access to the studio itself, I don't think that everything in there would provide equal access to the student. I think a more equitable access, being able to provide alternatives to requirements when the physicality of a task would be too much for the student to manage.
And that also goes into one of the things that you in the email that you all just sent out, but it's kind of fundamentally important that if a student needs an accommodation, but it fundamentally alters the requirements of the class, then we are not required to make that accommodation.
Correct. And it's interesting that you mentioned that fundamental alteration aspect of it. Most recently, the CSU just released the updated policy on the provision of accommodations and support services to students with disabilities. And there's a whole section in there about fundamental alteration. So if the accommodation requested fundamentally alters the intent of the program, then you're right. The program doesn't have to provide it, but we have to look for an alternative as well. But I highly recommend that faculty explore that new section because it really provides good alternatives and good process to be able to assess whether or not the request will fundamentally alter the program. One of the things that I think we think is that, okay, no, the accommodation was requested. No, we feel that it fundamentally alters the intent of the program. And then we can say it's either not approved or it may be modified. One of the things that I've been working with quite a bit recently, that I've been making sure my counselors adhere to it, that we adhere to it, and also I encourage faculty to use this process. It's called the interactive process. And what that means is that it basically is a discussion about the accommodation being requested. And it can initiate the discussion with the student and with the OSC counselor. And in cases where during that discussion we still feel that we needed to go through a formal academic accommodation review, then what we do at that point is that we create a small committee that can make the final determination. What I'm getting at is that we never want to unilaterally deny an accommodation without going through the interactive process. Even when we say that it fundamentally alters the intent of that particular program or class, we want to go through the interactive process. That is critical
Does that
to a final decision.
does that interactive process basically take a look at every potential alternative accommodation with every stakeholder involved in this particular situation? Is that essentially what it is?
Yes, and that's what we do. We explore all the options and all the alternatives to find something that is reasonable and that will still meet the requirement of the program.
So it sounds like this is a last resort. I mean, we really all should try to do anything that we can to give the student the opportunity to participate in the class as it was originally intended. There are better words, I'm sure. But if there's no way to do that, then you move on to this.
You move on to this, exactly.
My thanks to Gonzalo Centeno for sharing his wisdom on this issue. We will all come across it in our teaching lives. And as always, there are resources related to this topic in the Teaching Tools section of our website, including the California State University System's updated policies Gonzalo mentioned. There is a link to that. We'll cover more ground in episodes 21 and 22. If you have questions you'd like me to try and answer, please send them to questions@adjunctitis.com. Meanwhile, social media is a great tool to get everyone involved in the conversation. Right now, we're on Threads, TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube with the handle @adjunctitis. And you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/adjunctitis. If this has been helpful, we'd appreciate a follow, a thumbs up, or even a review. It does help more people find us. Please spread the word and help those who ask you for help. It's good teaching karma. Adjunctitis is a Look at It This Way production. I'm April Brown. Thank you for listening. Class dismissed.